Welcome back to The New American Dream is to Leave, the podcast that explores the stories of Americans who have found fulfillment and a better quality of life beyond the borders of the United States. I'm your host, Caleb Richard Gallagher, and I'm thrilled to bring you another inspiring episode. In our last episode, we delved into the world of digital nomadism with James and Sarah, a couple who traded their corporate jobs for a life of adventure and remote work. Today, we're shifting gears to explore another exciting aspect of the expat lifestyle: retirement abroad. For many Americans, the dream of a comfortable retirement seems increasingly out of reach. Rising costs of living, inadequate savings, and concerns about healthcare have left many feeling anxious about their golden years. But what if there was another option? What if you could stretch your retirement savings further, enjoy a higher quality of life, and immerse yourself in a vibrant new culture? That's exactly what our guest today, John, discovered when he made the bold decision to retire in Costa Rica. John spent decades climbing the corporate ladder in New York City, but as retirement approached, he found himself questioning whether the life he had built was truly the one he wanted to live out his golden years in. Now, after 5 years of living in the lush countryside of Costa Rica, John has a whole new perspective on what retirement can look like. From the stunning natural beauty and perfect climate to the warmth of the local community and the affordable cost of living, John has found a retirement paradise that many only dream of. In this episode, we'll hear John's story of transformation, how he went from a stressed-out corporate executive to a relaxed and fulfilled retiree living his best life in Central America. We'll explore the challenges and rewards of retiring abroad, the practicalities of making such a big move, and the unexpected joys John has discovered along the way. So whether you're nearing retirement age and looking for alternatives, or just curious about what life could look like beyond the conventional American retirement, this episode is for you. John's story is a testament to the power of thinking outside the box and daring to create the retirement you truly desire. Before we dive in, I want to remind you that if you're enjoying this podcast and finding value in these stories, please take a moment to subscribe and leave a review. Your support helps us continue to bring you these inspiring tales of Americans redefining their dreams abroad. Now, without further ado, let's welcome John to the show and hear about his incredible journey of retiring in Costa Rica. John, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Caleb. It's great to be here.
Let's start at the beginning. Can you tell us a bit about your life before you made the move to Costa Rica? What was your career like, and what led you to consider retiring abroad?
I spent just over 35 years working in finance in New York City. I started as a junior analyst fresh out of college and worked my way up to become a senior executive at one of the major banks on Wall Street. On paper, I had it all: the corner office with a view of the city, the big salary, the prestige, the company car. I was living what many would consider the epitome of the American dream. But the truth is, I was burnt out. The stress was taking a serious toll on my health. I was dealing with high blood pressure, insomnia, and I can't even count the number of important family events I missed because of work. I was essentially married to my job, and my actual marriage was suffering because of it. As I approached retirement age, I started crunching the numbers and realized that even with my substantial savings, maintaining our lifestyle in New York was going to be a challenge. The cost of living just kept skyrocketing, especially in the city. And I was really worried about healthcare costs eating into our nest egg. It felt like no matter how much we had saved, it might not be enough.
That's a concern I hear from a lot of people approaching retirement age. It seems like the goalposts keep moving, doesn't it? So how did Costa Rica come into the picture?
It was actually my wife, Linda, who first suggested it. We'd taken a vacation there about 10 years ago to celebrate our 25th wedding anniversary. We spent 2 weeks traveling around the country from the beaches of Manuel Antonio to the cloud forests of Monteverde, and we absolutely fell in love with the place. One night, after a particularly stressful day at work, I think I had been on conference calls for about 14 hours straight. I came home late, completely exhausted. Linda took one look at me and half-jokingly said, "Why don't we just retire to Costa Rica?" And something just clicked. I remember laughing it off at first, but the idea stuck with me. That night, I couldn't sleep, and I found myself on the computer at 3 a.m., researching retirement in Costa Rica. The more I read, the more appealing it became.
That's fascinating. Can you walk us through the decision-making process? How did you go from that initial late-night research session to actually making the move?
It definitely wasn't an overnight decision, that's for sure. We spent about a year researching and planning before we made the move, and the first thing we did was take another trip to Costa Rica, this time with retirement in mind. We explored different areas, talked to expats already living there, and really tried to envision what our life could look like. We visited several different regions, the Central Valley, the Pacific Coast, the Caribbean side. We wanted to get a feel for the different microclimates and lifestyles available. We also made a point of visiting during the rainy season to see what it was really like year-round, not just during the picture-perfect dry season. During this trip, we also connected with a real estate agent who specialized in helping expats find homes. This was incredibly helpful, as she was able to give us insights into the different areas, the process of buying property as foreigners, and the realities of day-to-day life in Costa Rica.
It sounds like you really did your due diligence. What were some of the key factors that ultimately convinced you to make the move?
There were several factors that really stood out to us. First and foremost was the cost of living. We found that we could live a very comfortable lifestyle in Costa Rica for about a third of what it was costing us in New York. This meant our retirement savings would stretch much further, allowing us to do more of the things we love without constantly worrying about money. The second major factor was the healthcare system. Costa Rica has a universal healthcare system that, as legal residents, we're able to pay into. The quality of care is excellent, and the cost is a fraction of what we were paying in the U.S. This was a huge relief, as healthcare costs were one of our biggest concerns about retirement. Then there's the climate and natural beauty. Where we settled, in the Central Valley, the temperature is pretty much perfect year-round. We're surrounded by lush forests, beautiful mountains, and we're not far from some of the most stunning beaches I've ever seen. The abundance of nature and outdoor activities really appealed to us as we wanted to lead a more active, healthy lifestyle in retirement. Lastly, but certainly not least, was the culture and the concept of pura vida. It's a phrase you hear all the time in Costa Rica, and it essentially means pure life or simple life. It's about slowing down, appreciating the little things, and not getting stressed out over things you can't control. After decades in the high-pressure world of finance, this way of life was incredibly appealing.
Those all sound like compelling reasons, but I'm sure it wasn't all smooth sailing. What were some of the challenges or concerns you had to overcome?
You're absolutely right, Caleb. It wasn't all smooth sailing, and we had to have some tough conversations and work through several concerns before we made the final decision. One of the biggest concerns was about our kids and grandkids back in the States. Our 2 children were grown with families of their own, but the thought of being so far away from them and our grandchildren was really difficult. We worried about missing important milestones and not being able to be there for them if they needed us. We also had concerns about the language barrier. Neither Linda nor I spoke much Spanish beyond what we remembered from high school. The idea of navigating daily life in a country where English isn't the primary language was intimidating. Another major concern was about our social life. We had built a strong network of friends and colleagues in New York over the decades. The thought of leaving that all behind and starting from scratch in a new country was daunting. There were also practical concerns about managing our finances from abroad, dealing with residency requirements, and what we would do with all our belongings. It felt like there were a million little details to consider.
Those are all valid concerns. How did you work through them?
It took a lot of discussion, research, and soul-searching. For our concerns about family, we made a plan to visit the States regularly and set aside money in our budget for these trips. We also became very proficient with video chatting technology. It's not the same as being there in person, but it allows us to stay connected and involved in our families' lives. As for the language, we started taking Spanish lessons before we moved and have continued them since arriving in Costa Rica. It's been a challenge, but also a rewarding experience. We're not fluent yet, but we can navigate daily life pretty well now. For our social concerns, we reached out to expat communities online before moving. This allowed us to make some connections and get advice from people who had already made the move. Once we arrived, we made an effort to get involved in local activities and meet both expats and Costa Ricans. It took some time, but we've built a wonderful community here. The financial and practical concerns required a lot of research and planning. We worked with our bank to set up international banking options. consulted with a tax professional about the implications of retiring abroad, and spent a lot of time researching visa and residency requirements. As for our belongings, we had a big garage sale, donated a lot, and put some sentimental items in storage. It was a process, and there were moments of doubt, but for every concern we had, we found a solution or realized it wasn't as big an issue as we'd thought.
That's a great point about the preparation involved. What was the biggest challenge you faced in making this transition?
I'd say the biggest challenge was psychological. It was about letting go of the identity I'd built over decades in my career and embracing a completely new lifestyle. There's a certain status that comes with being a senior executive at a major bank in New York. I had to be honest with myself about how much of my self-worth was tied up in that identity. There were moments of doubt, wondering if we were making the right choice. Was I really ready to leave behind everything I'd worked so hard for? Was I having some sort of midlife crisis? These were questions I grappled with. But you know what? The moment we arrived at our new home in Costa Rica, all those doubts melted away. We have this little house with a view of the mountains, surrounded by the most incredible wildlife. I remember waking up the first morning to the sound of howler monkeys in the distance and birds I couldn't name. The stress just evaporated. It was like a weight I didn't even know I was carrying had been lifted off my shoulders.
That sounds incredible, John. Can you paint a picture for our listeners of what your daily life looks like now?
Gladly. It's so different from my life in New York, sometimes I can hardly believe it myself. I wake up naturally with the sun, no alarm clock needed. The first thing I do is make a cup of locally grown coffee, some of the best coffee in the world, I might add, and enjoy it on our porch. From there, I can see the mountains in the distance and watch the toucans and monkeys in the trees nearby. It's like waking up in paradise every day. Most mornings, I'll take a walk in the nearby nature reserve. We're fortunate to live close to a protected area, and the biodiversity is just incredible. I've become quite the amateur bird watcher since moving here. In New York, I couldn't have told you the difference between a pigeon and a sparrow. Now I can identify dozens of tropical birds. After my walk, I might spend some time tending to our small garden. We grow a lot of our own fruits and vegetables now. There's something incredibly satisfying about eating a salad made entirely from things you've grown yourself.
It sounds like you've really embraced the local lifestyle. How do you spend your afternoons?
In the afternoons, I often volunteer at the local community center teaching English. It's been a wonderful way to give back to the community and to meet people. I've formed some great friendships through this, both with other expats and with local Costa Ricans. When I'm not volunteering, I might take Spanish lessons to improve my own language skills. It's been humbling to be a student again at this stage in life, but also incredibly rewarding. There's something about learning a new language that keeps your mind sharp. We've made friends with both expats and locals, and there's always someone dropping by for a chat or inviting us over for a barbecue. The social life here is much more spontaneous and relaxed than what we were used to in New York. We eat fresher, healthier food. We spend more time outdoors. And the best part? Our retirement savings go so much further here. We're able to live comfortably, travel, and even put some money aside for visits back to the States.
How have you dealt with healthcare? That's a major concern for many retirees.
Actually, healthcare has been one of the most pleasant surprises. Costa Rica has a universal healthcare system that we're able to pay into as residents. The quality of care is excellent, and the cost is a fraction of what we were paying in the U.S. For example, last year I needed some routine tests done, blood work, a stress test, that sort of thing. The entire process, including consultations with a cardiologist, cost less than what my copay would have been back in the States. And the facilities were modern and clean, comparable to what you'd find in any good U.S. hospital. We've also found that many doctors here are U.S. trained and speak English, which has been helpful. There's a large private healthcare sector in addition to the public system, so you have options depending on your needs and preferences. For more serious procedures, there's always the option of medical tourism. Many expats here will go to San Jose or even back to the U.S. for major treatments, but for day-to-day care and most procedures, the local healthcare system is more than adequate.
That's really reassuring to hear. Now let's talk about the financial aspect. How has retiring in Costa Rica affected your finances?
It's been a game changer, Caleb. Our cost of living here is about a third of what it was in New York. Our beautiful home with a mountain view costs less than a small condo in Manhattan. Utilities are much cheaper, especially since we don't need heating or air conditioning thanks to the perfect climate. Food costs are lower, especially if you shop at local markets and eat seasonal produce. We eat out more often than we did in New York, and it's still cheaper. A nice dinner for two at a good restaurant might cost $30–40, including wine. The lower cost of living means our retirement savings are lasting much longer than they would have in the U.S. We're able to live very comfortably, travel both within Costa Rica and internationally, and still have money left over. It's given us a level of financial freedom that we never thought we'd have in retirement.
That's incredible. It sounds like you're able to have a higher quality of life for less money. How about the legal aspects of living in Costa Rica? Can you tell us about the visa process?
Sure, the visa process was actually easier than we expected. Costa Rica has a special category for retirees called the pensionado visa. To qualify, you need to show proof of a minimum monthly income from a permanent source like a pension or Social Security. When we applied, the minimum was $1,000 per month, but I believe it's gone up slightly since then. We worked with a local lawyer to handle the paperwork, which I'd recommend. There's quite a bit of documentation required, and it all needs to be translated into Spanish. The process took about 6 months from start to finish, but once we got our residency, it was good for 2 years and renewable after that. One thing to note is that as residents, we're required to pay into the national healthcare system, which is fine by us given the quality and affordability of the care.
That's helpful information. Now, for our listeners who might be considering a similar move, what advice would you give them?
First and foremost, do your research. Read everything you can, join online expat communities, and if possible, spend some extended time in the country before making a permanent move. We spent a month here before deciding to move, and it gave us a much better idea of what day-to-day life would be like. Secondly, be prepared for an adjustment period. No matter how much you prepare, there will be surprises and challenges. Approach them with patience and a sense of humor. Remember that you're a guest in another country and things will be different from what you're used to. Lastly, I'd say be open to new experiences. Embrace the local culture, try to learn the language, make friends with both expats and locals. The richness of this experience comes from fully immersing yourself in your new home. Oh, and one more thing, don't bring too much stuff. We shipped a container of household goods when we moved, and honestly, we could have done without most of it. It's amazing how little you really need, especially in a climate where you don't need a lot of different clothes for different seasons.
That's fantastic advice, John. As we start to wrap up, I have a couple more questions for you. First, how has this move affected your relationship with your wife?
That's a great question, Caleb. I can honestly say that moving to Costa Rica has been wonderful for our relationship. Back in New York, we were both so caught up in our busy lives that we didn't spend as much quality time together as we should have. Here, we've rediscovered each other in a way. We're doing new things together, taking Spanish classes, exploring the country, trying new foods. We're facing challenges together and supporting each other through the ups and downs of expat life. It's brought us closer and given us a shared adventure. There's also less stress in our lives overall, which naturally leads to fewer arguments and more enjoyment of each other's company. We have more time for long conversations, for sitting on the porch watching the sunset together. It's like we're on a permanent vacation in the best possible way.
That's beautiful, John. It's wonderful to hear how this move has enriched your relationship. Now, my last question, if you could go back and talk to yourself 5 years ago, just as you were making this decision, what would you say?
I'd tell myself to do it sooner. No, in all seriousness, I'd say, trust your instincts. This leap of faith will pay off in ways you can't even imagine right now. You're not just changing your address, you're changing your life for the better. I'd also tell myself not to worry so much about the what-ifs. Yes, there will be challenges, but you'll overcome them. And the rewards, the peace of mind, the healthier lifestyle, the sense of adventure, they far outweigh any difficulties. Lastly, I'd say, get ready for the ride of your life. You're about to embark on an incredible journey that will open your eyes, expand your horizons, and bring you more joy than you ever thought possible in retirement.
John, thank you so much for sharing your story with us today. Your journey is truly inspiring, and I know it will resonate with many of our listeners.
Thank you, Caleb. It's been a pleasure to share my experience. I hope it encourages others to consider the possibilities that lie beyond our borders.
And to all our listeners out there, remember, retirement doesn't have to mean slowing down or settling for less. As John's story shows us, it can be an opportunity for adventure, growth, and a whole new chapter of life. If you have questions about retiring abroad, or if you have your own story to share, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at leaveandthrive@gmail.com. We love hearing from you, and your stories could even be featured in future episodes. For those of you looking for more in-depth information and guidance on making a move abroad, whether for retirement or any other reason, be sure to check out my book, The New American Dream is to Leave. It's available now on Amazon and covers everything from choosing your destination to navigating visas, managing finances, and building a fulfilling life in your new home. Next week, we'll be exploring yet another facet of the expat experience. So make sure you're subscribed to the podcast so you don't miss out on any of these inspiring stories. And if you're enjoying the show, please take a moment to leave us a rating and review. Your support means the world to us and helps others discover these important conversations. Once again, a huge thank you to John for being with us today, and to all of you for listening. Remember, the new American dream is waiting for you, perhaps in a place you've never even considered before. All it takes is the courage to take that first step. Until next time, this is Caleb Richard Gallagher, reminding you that your best life might be just a plane ride away. Keep dreaming, keep exploring, and we'll see you on the next adventure.